Welcome back. I'm Eric Kane. We are nearing 10,000 subscribers on this channel, which is pretty cool. And I attribute that a lot to the Rings of Power. Thank you. Thank you, JD Payne and Patrick McKay, for making such a shit show that I've had tons and tons of material to work with over these last few weeks, which have gone by surprisingly fast. It's kind of crazy when you think about it that there were only 8 episodes in this season, just 8 episodes in which very little happened, and yet tons of the second age was condensed into these 8 episodes. Like in terms of character, like development, it was almost static. But in terms of things that happened, we had Mordor created, the three rings were forged, Sauron was revealed. It all happened in a flash, but at the same time, it felt desperately slow. It's also crazy that 8 episodes of season one have already aired, and yet we have to wait till 2024 to dive back into this. I mean, it's not like I'm eagerly awaiting what comes next, but I am, kind of baffled that Amazon would take so long between seasons. It's not like there's a global pandemic or anything right now. So, anyways, I wanted to talk about this article, this review by Sean T. Collins at Decider. I often find articles that are terrible, but this is a great review, and I think he says some really interesting things about how adaptations work. So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning, a little bit from the end. So this is just a review of the 8th episode, though he touches on some other stuff of the Rings of Power. So, change is value neutral. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The process of adaptation from source material to new material, from one medium to another, is tricky and complex and prone to being misunderstood by just about everyone. Books are not film. Books are not television. And hell, film is not television. These are distinct media with distinct strengths and weaknesses and demands. In adapting one to another, change to the origin is necessary to suit the strengths and weaknesses and demands of the destination. The passage of time and the emergence of new social norms are dual factors that deserve consideration, and of course there are the tastes and talents of the artist involved to consider. Any one of these points, much less all of them in tandem, serves to explain why alterations are, in the end, simply alterations, neither good nor bad in and of themselves. The question is not, did this adaptation change anything, but rather, were the changes the adaptation made to the source material beneficial, given the new medium involved? Did they enhance the source material's strengths? Did they improve upon the source material generally? Were they true to the source material's tone and themes? Did they make the adaptation stronger than a more direct and literal transposition from one medium to the other would have been? So these are great points to consider when you're talking about an adaptation from, say, a book to a TV series, or a video game to a movie, or a movie to a video game, right? These mediums do have different strengths, and they have different drawbacks. They have different limitations. A book, you can go, in the internal mind of the narrator or of any character, right? You can't do that as easily in a movie. In a movie, you can show these visuals. You can show the scenes. You can create a different mood through visuals and music. Whereas in a book, you have to imagine it all yourself. Again, these are neither bad nor good. So when you're changing that, I want to before we get into more of this article, I want to talk a little bit about House of the Dragon. So a little bit of spoilers here. House of the Dragon is also an adaptation from a book to a TV series, and it makes a lot of changes. The Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin is a history, and it's told as a history who uses sources. And during the Dance of Dragons, that the Civil War that this show is going to be, that's leading up to, during that whole segment of the book, the book's fictional author, the historian writing this, draws on various sources, and each of these sources often has different interpretations of what happened, and they're all unreliable to some degree because they have their own biases and their own perspective, and they were writing at different times. Some of them were there, some of them were not there. They drew on their own sources. So this is an interesting approach to writing a story because it's using unreliable narrators. Whereas the TV show doesn't use this format at all, right? It's telling, in my opinion at least, it's telling what actually happened. And so the show has a lot of different perspectives to draw from. there's not one right answer. There often in the book you're given like, well, what this person said this happened, this person said this happened, and then the show, it has the creators of the show, they have to kind of decide which one they're going to use, and sometimes they don't use any of them. They do something else entirely. But this draws on the strengths of being a TV show, and the book draws on the strengths of being able to tell it like a history book. The House of the Dragon makes other changes, right? It ages up Rhaenyra, and it ages down Alicent, and it makes them more of friends in the beginning, whereas in the book they're not friends, and Alicent is quite a bit older, though still not old, but quite a bit older than Rhaenyra, and they almost from the beginning have an antagonistic relationship, whereas in the show they treat them as friends at first. And again, I think this draws on the strengths of making this a more compelling drama, whereas the book doesn't have a lot of dialogue. There's not a lot of like scenes of people talking about stuff. It's much more like laying out what happened with the occasional snippet of dialogue. In the show, they have to have dialogue. They have to have character interactions. They have to create a whole they have to fill in a lot of blanks, right? And House of the Dragon fills in a lot of blanks that are left out of this story, including, a great deal of the character of Viserys, who is treated as a much more involved and deep and emotionally complex character in the show than he is in the book, where he's given a lot less time. And again, this enhances the source material. This this plays to its strengths. It does stick to the tone and themes of the source material, but it draws those in interesting new directions. And one reason the House of the Dragon, even though it does make a lot of changes to the source material, one reason that it works so much is that there's clearly a deep respect for that source material throughout, and every change is made carefully and purposefully. Now you can compare that to the Rings of Power. Now, the Rings of Power also has a lot of blanks to fill in, and I think that most people would have been okay with a lot of changes being made to that also, if those changes had answered these questions satisfactorily. So I'm going to read, I'm going to skip past his recapping. It's good recap, but and at the end he says, the end, fuck this, which... Anyways, this is the extent of anger that I will vent over this finale of this show, which in the end is far too dopey to get this worked up about. Explicitly chosen to helm Jeff Bezos' billion-dollar folly for their expertise in the canon, despite their complete lack of experience in filmmaking or television, creators J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay have displayed neither. Their alleged knowledge of Tolkien's legendarium means nothing when they've changed virtually every known particular of that legendarium. The fate of Isildur, who cuts the ring from Sauron's hand after the final battle of the last alliance of elves and men, is still being treated as a mystery instead of a foregone conclusion. Gandalf is now present in Middle-earth during the Second Age. Galadriel is directly responsible for the rise of Sauron and the creation of Mordor. Elrond and Galadriel are both complicit in covering up Sauron's emergence and identity. Celebrimbor and Sauron's collaboration on the Rings of Power lasted approximately 5 days and led to the creation not of the 7 rings for the dwarves or the 9 rings for men, the rings over which Sauron planned to have direct control thanks to his planned creation of the 1 ring to master them, but to the creation of the 3 rings for the elves, which here are shown to have been made first instead of last, a prototype instead of a last resort. None of it is accurate to the books, but more importantly, none of it makes any sense for the story. Excuse me, I am still fighting off this cold. None of it improves upon the source material. None of it is true to Tolkien's themes and tone. None of it makes the adaptation stronger. Cheap mysteries instead of grandeur and terror. Desperate cover-ups instead of hubris and tragedy. Shoehorned nostalgia from Peter Jackson's superior work instead of forging a new path from fresh material. A total lack of confidence in Tolkien's Second Age storytelling, replaced by pat, rote story beats from 1,000 lesser minds. From top to bottom, none of it works at all. So I won't read the rest of this. It's good, though. You should read it. I'll link to it. But I like this. I like how he frames this, frames what an adaptation ought to try to achieve, and then answers the question, does it achieve these things? None of this makes the adaptation stronger. None of the changes make sense for the story. None of them draw upon Tolkien's themes. None of them draw upon his legendarium. And I think, and this brings me to one more point, which is just that, you see a lot of fans of this show sneer at Tolkien fans, at Tolkien zealots, at Tolkien, what was one guy on Twitter said, anal Tolkien zealots or something, Tolkien purists. There's this sneering, arrogant, broad strokes judgment of people who are fans of Tolkien, who just want to enjoy something that fucking resembles Tolkien, man. And I just want to ask, I want these people to imagine their favorite books, or one of their favorite books. Say you have a story or a series of books that's very special to you, and you hear that it's being adapted for a big television show. And then these books are taken, and all the backstory in the books are changed. Some of the major characters are written completely different for no apparent reason. And all this stuff is thrown out the window. All this backstory, all the lore that shapes these stories and fundamentally alters what happens in them in ways that simply don't make sense, that didn't need to happen. And the people making this show say, well, you just don't like it because you are X, Y, or Z. You're sexist, you're racist, you're stupid, you're too much a fan. And all these new fans come on, and all these new fans sneer at you and laugh at you and make fun of you and show up on your Facebook page and show up in your comments and tell you that you're a bad person because this thing that you love has been totally altered and fundamentally changed in a way that makes you upset. You have to think about how this, if you're a new fan to this, if you've come into, maybe you like sort of like Tolkien, but you're not a huge fan. You come to this and you're like, oh, it's good. Fine. I don't care. That's great. You like it. Fine. But to say that people who are upset about this, who do want to see a more accurate and better told story, when all this money is being put at it, it's not like you get a lot of Tolkien. It's not like there's been Tolkien TV shows before. Like, this is something that ought to be exciting and a joyful occasion for Tolkien fans. And yet, time and time again, we keep seeing these adaptations that just seem to just dismiss and act like the fans that were here before are somehow bad and wrong. And don't get me wrong, there are toxic fans. I absolutely know that this is true. There are people who don't want any changes at all, and they're unreasonable people. And I know that in an adaptation, you have to, we talked about it just now, there have to be changes. The medium demands it, for the most part. Although I will say my ideal Tolkien adaptation is an animated mini-series of some kind that sticks as close to the text as possible. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say, because I'm losing my voice or something just as soon as I start making this video. So I think that's a really good review, though, and I like how he frames the concept of adaptation and poses those questions and then answers them, because Rings of Power was, as the article says, a crushing disappointment. Thank you for watching. Hope you don't get sick. Peace.